One of the most fascinating topics in modern agriculture is the rise of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. Now, these can be a crop, which is like a plant or an animal. You'll often see GMCs or GMAs, genetically modified crops or genetically modified animals. And whichever one of these you're talking about, organisms, crops, animals, right? So like Venn diagram, the whole thing, all genetically modified animals are organisms, but not all organisms are animals. Okay. Um, when you're talking about GMOs, these are a man-made genotype. So you start with one set of naturally occurring DNA, and then you either cut out the things you don't like or you add genes that you do like. So you could remove the regulatory gene that makes the spine on a rose because now you want to grow a rose that doesn't have spines. Um, this is a man-made manipulation of DNA that's done at the molecular level. Ton of details I won't bore you now, plus I don't really get it. But you cut out genes you don't want, or you insert genes that you do want. You know, there's like a gene for having like an extra finger, you just add that gene or whatever. Being able to roll your tongue is a gene. Imagine you add that gene, now your baby can roll its tongue. I don't know. Scientists can make all new life forms with completely unique characteristics. You may have heard that we've made cats which glow in the dark so that we know which cat is which for a test on their ability to fight AIDS or whatever. Now, this is not the same thing as selective breeding. A lot of people say, well, we've made Chihuahuas and we've made Great Danes. Why not make genetically modified tomatoes? And I understand the point. We manipulate the world in a lot of ways, but let's be really, really clear. A Chihuahua could result in nature. So we selected the smallest dogs to make babies for many generations to get a Chihuahua, but natural pressures could have selected smaller dogs for many generations to make a Chihuahua. That's a fun word to say. Now, selective breeding is natural selection that we guide. We provide the selective pressure to make a smaller dog or a taller dog or a darker dog or whatever. You can make sweeter tomatoes. You can make strawberries that are bigger by breeding the biggest strawberries with each other, cross-pollinate over and over, take those seeds, plant the strawberry over many years. Your average strawberry will be larger. You can do that. Selective breeding, that's old school. People have been doing that for a really long time, probably 10,000 years, maybe more. We've been doing that for a long time. But GMO is different. There is no way in nature that the genes of a salmon could be added to a strawberry. We've done that. Turns out that salmon have genes which make them resist freezing. They have like an anti-freeze in their blood so they can be in really cold water. A lot of fish actually have that. So their blood won't freeze when they're in water near freezing. And so scientists recently took the anti-freeze additive gene out of fish and spliced that into fruit so the fruit won't freeze. Now, there's no way that natural selection could get salmon and strawberry to cross their genes. That's not possible. Only a human can do that. So yeah, it's like selective breeding in the sense that we manipulate our environment, but it's an entirely new type of manipulation. We're playing with the DNA. I've tried. There's no way to make a salmon breed with a strawberry. Now, GMOs have a lot of benefits, and our environment is chock full of genetically modified organisms by now. Um, we can make crops that are stronger, more nutritious, higher yield, grow faster, grow in another part of the year. That was all in your book. You should have those four top bullets. But I'd like to add a few that your book didn't mention that are a little bit more cutting edge. But what about growing medicines? Like some medicines are very expensive to make, but if you grew them in a field that might be cheaper, there are countries where it's very difficult to set up a chemical processing infrastructure to make medicines. But if you could say, here, grow this lettuce, you can grow lettuce more easily than building a pharmaceutical facility. So maybe this is a way to reach distant parts of the planet with medicine. Some people might be more likely to take aspirin if it tasted delicious, or you might be more likely to remember your birth control pills every night if they tasted like chocolate or whatever. So there's an idea that maybe we could genetically modify crops to contain medicines, or we could modify animals to have human compatible organs, right? Like that may sound gross, but thousands of Americans die every day because they can't get a liver or a lung or a heart or a spleen or I don't know what else. So, like, if we're already breeding the pigs to eat them, wouldn't it be cool if their heart and liver and lung could save grandma? Like, there's thousands of people that die every day from this. So I think that would be a pretty spicy one. There's already work to make algae that produces biodiesel. So you just press the algae and you get diesel out of that. By the way, that's current carbon. That was carbon already in the atmosphere, right? That grew that algae. That's a photosynthetic algae. So then when you squeeze that algae, you've made biodiesel that you can put into a diesel engine from the atmosphere. That's not coming from the rocks. That's already in our system. That's not new to the system. So that's an alternative to fossil fuels. And there's also some work to make these bacteria that just fart out bubbles of hydrogen. Hydrogen fuel cells are pretty simple and really clean and effective, but getting the hydrogen is really tricky. But if you could just have bacteria that make hydrogen, that would solve huge energy challenges all over the world because bacteria are easy to grow, right? You could even grow them in wastewater, for example. We could customize flavors. Like, I'd like my chocolate to taste like whiskey. Like, we could do that. Maybe make sushi that doesn't spoil. Can you imagine, like, opening like a bar at like you're out jogging and you like open your backpack and like instead of eating like a pack of goo, you like have like a room temperature ready to go sushi that isn't rotten. Like, I don't know, man, we could make all kinds of cool genetically modified stuff. We could make me handsome, I guess, or make copies of me that look better. Avocados that ripen when I want them to, not all of a sudden at the wrong day. I don't know, man. Like the idea of genetic modification is really exciting, and I actually think, as a scientist, like, let's go for it. Let's go bonkers. I'm super happy if we can, like, resolve some human suffering of any sort. I'm all over it, right? I mean, any way to help my fellow man, I'd be willing to do this at whatever the cost. But there are some very relevant concerns. And some of my science idols say this is nonsense, like Neil deGrasse Tyson says that these are nonsense. And I'm kind of nervous agreeing with him. That's tough for me. There's four things I've heard that to me seem like reasonable concerns. Number one, you can't control where genes go. So, like, you know, if you have corn over here that's genetically modified, and open pollinated corn over here, these genes are going to cross over to this. And if you're saving some of these seeds to plant your corn next year, you might end up with qualities that you didn't want from your neighbor's field. Like, you can't limit the spread. It's called genetic contamination. And there's this vocab term that nobody asked me about, and I forgot to underline it because I'm a bad teacher. Right here, we've made crops that are toxic to bugs. There's like a bacteria in the soil called Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. I believe it's in your study guide. And BT is a bacterium that bugs cannot eat. It lives in the soil, and to make sure that other stuff in the soil doesn't eat these bacteria, the bacteria is toxic. Now, we've taken that toxin, or rather the gene from that makes that toxin, and we've put that gene into a variety of crops. So every cell of the crop is now making this toxin, and every cell of that crop is toxic to bugs, coincidentally not toxic to humans. So this is all over our food supply. BT corn is a wonder of agriculture. You don't have to use pesticides. The bugs can't eat it anyway. The bugs die when they eat your corn. You don't need pesticides. Problem is, if that gene starts to spread through all the corn on the planet, there's a whole lot of bugs that we might want, and this could cause the extinction of monarch butterflies that migrate through cornfields, or bees that we need to pollinate our almond trees or whatever. So the idea that you can't contain genes kind of makes some people nervous. There's another thing that makes people nervous. Most genetically modified crops have this thing called a terminator gene. Let me explain. This takes a minute, okay? Let's say that I have made genetically modified corn. When I sell this to you, you're going to grow corn from these seeds. But if you can make your own seed from those plants, I'm out of business. So the companies that make genetically modified crops add a special gene, right? So the seeds I sell you will sprout, but the seeds from that plant will not. That's called a terminator gene. And that's a really smart business practice. It's very, very common. So I'll sell you seeds this year, but once your corn grows, don't bother keeping the grain because it won't sprout for you. I'll see you next year when you need more corn seed, right? I put $1 bazillion into developing this, so I want you to keep buying from me so I can pay for that investment. This is plain fair business. Problem is that a lot of places on the planet, farmers cannot afford to buy their seed every year. Subsistence farmers all over the world do this thing called seed to seed agriculture. So like my grandfather, when he would grow corn, he'd grow a big block, he'd harvest all the corn, and then he would save a handful of that harvest so that he could plant next year. But if the terminator gene gets into a subsistence farmer's crop, he won't be able to grow his food next year. And in many parts of the planet, that could lead to starvation because subsistence farmers often depend on that seed to be viable. This has happened. Entire communities in remote parts of Central America, had wind-blown pollen from a northern Mexican genetically modified cornfield. That pollen blew down into Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador. And those farmers, remote farmers in the mountains, their corn lost viability. So the farmers were all planting the corn. It wasn't coming up. They walk next door to their homie's house and they go, "Hey man, I'm sorry. Can I borrow some of your seed? My corn didn't sprout." And the guy's like, "I don't know. My corn didn't sprout." And they go down the street and all of a sudden for miles and miles and miles, there's subsistence farmers who can't grow their food. This is a serious social justice issue. Number 3, there is some fear that there could be unintended consequences. Maybe there's enough testing, maybe there isn't. There is some argument about how much testing there is. And one of the things that makes a lot of people nervous is that a lot of genes have multiple functions. So the gene that you choose to make your strawberry sweeter might also produce a peanut allergy. I don't know, I made that up. But because genes do a bunch of stuff in combination with other genes, we can't really foresee what's going to happen. And so there is a lot of fear that there could just be unintended consequences, random allergies being triggered or whatever. And there is some interesting research that in the United States, where we have the most consumption of genetically modified foods, we also have the most incidence of food allergies. Maybe unrelated, but anyway, fear of unintended consequences. And problem number 4, in this country, we don't label these ingredients. If we did, we're worried that consumers would choose not to eat them. And God forbid they make these decisions and hurt our food business, because those decisions might be stupid, right? We don't have any evidence that GMOs are bad, so why would we label them? Silly Americans might make the wrong choice about their diet. So we take away that choice. We don't label that food here. Get ready for a shocking statistic. In the United States, if you buy a food which is packaged, there's about a 75% chance that that contains at least one genetically modified ingredient. In other words, 75% of all packaged food items contain one or more GMOs. I eat packaged food all the time, so I'm fine. There's no reason to say that this is bad, but we don't label it here. And that means if you're really worried about this, you're out of luck. It's very difficult for you to avoid GMOs. If you go to the European Union, you buy your Snickers bar, and where it says corn syrup, it'll say from GMO corn or whatever. And a lot of European consumers are like, I don't care, I eat Snickers all the time. But some European consumers say, no, I don't want to support this business, I'm not going to eat that ingredient. These are the 4 main fears about GMOs. And like I said, I'm kind of excited about these. I just sort of wish that we would resolve those. Okay, I got to see what my daughter needed. I'm going to stop.